Did you know that with just this one little magnet and this one little length of wire, we can generate electricity? Well, I want to design and build my own hand-cranked electric generator, but first I want to get a better understanding of how these two interact. So I'm going to do some experiments. Let me show you the setup. I have a length of enamelled copper wire that's connected at one end to ground and the other end to channel 1 of my digital storage oscilloscope. This is basically just a fancy voltmeter. It measures the positive or negative voltage on the probe, but it does it very accurately and very quickly. In this case, it will be recording the voltage 125,000 times per second, and saving that data to a USB stick so I can make fancy graphics on the computer later on. The second important part of this experiment is my camera. I'll be recording at either 480 or 960 frames per second, and then using the metadata to synchronize the oscilloscope data with the video as best I can. And lastly, the magnets I'm using are N35 grade neodymium magnets, 19mm by 28mm. These have a magnetic north pole on one end and south pole on the opposite end. For our first test, I have our copper wire pulled tight between two plumbing fittings that happen to be the right height. Let's see what happens when I place our very strong magnet directly underneath the wire, with the north pole facing up. And now with the north pole facing down. Nothing. It looks like the magnet doesn't produce any voltage when it sits up against the wire. Let's see what happens when we introduce some motion. Now that's a bit more interesting. What we see here is that when a south pole passes at speed under the wire, a positive voltage is produced at your end of the wire, reaching a maximum of 15 millivolts. I'm going to keep that trace in green to compare to a much faster throw of the magnet. Here we can see that the faster magnet produces a higher voltage, so there's a speed to voltage relationship. What do you think will happen if we send the magnet through with the north pole facing up this time? It appears that the same direction of motion but opposite magnetic polarity produces a negative voltage at your end of the wire. So what happens if we send two magnets through together, one with the south pole facing up and the other with the north? The first magnet produces a positive voltage and the second magnet produces a negative voltage. In close succession, they produce something resembling a sine wave, like the alternating current that powers your home. If I push and pull this pair of magnets under the wire, we can see that not only does the magnetic polarity affect the electrical polarity, but so does the direction of motion. If we follow just the leftmost magnet, it produces negative 13 millivolts on its leftward journey, and then positive 13 millivolts on its rightward journey. All of these experiments so far are demonstrating something called electromagnetic induction, which was first described by Michael Faraday in 1831. He discovered that a changing magnetic field can induce an electric current in a circuit. That's why our stationary magnet didn't do anything. The wire was sitting in a strong magnetic field, but it wasn't changing. In my previous video on electromagnets, we used Fleming's left-hand rule to determine the direction a wire will move in a magnetic field when an electric current is applied to it. But this time we're doing the opposite, and moving a magnetic field across a wire to produce an electric current. Thankfully for us, Fleming had two hands, and he gave us the right-hand rule for electric generators. Let's inspect a moment in time when our magnet is passing under the wire. Fleming's right-hand rule requires the conductor's direction of motion relative to the magnetic field. So in our case, the magnet moves to the right and our conductor's relative motion is to the left. It needs a magnetic field direction, which in this case is down, and then the middle finger tells us the direction a conventional current will flow, in this case towards us, which would produce a positive voltage at our end of the wire, and we've seen that it does. Now let's see what happens if we make a small coil in the middle of the wire. The previous straight wire result will appear in green. You can see here that having 3 wire loops has given us 3 times the voltage. And we've also gained a negative voltage period when the magnet passes under the trailing edge of the loop. If we take a look at this from above, we can see that only the left and right edges of the loop are inducing a current in the wire. The top and bottom edges aren't perpendicular to both the magnetic flux and the direction of motion, thus they can't contribute any current. Also, the keen-eyed among you may have noticed an asymmetry in our last waveform. The voltage is 33% higher under the left-hand side of the coil compared to the right. That's because the wire passes 4 times on the left and only 3 times on the right. This demonstrates a completely linear relationship between the number of windings and the voltage produced. Next, I want to test one more variable, which is adding an iron core to our coil to see how it affects the voltage generated. The magnet seems a little too interested in our iron core. I'm going to try sinking the whole experiment into some plywood to keep everything in place, and I'll try sliding the magnet over the top. For a baseline, here's a coreless test. You can see that the asymmetry has reversed because I turned the coil over, but the voltage generated is comparable to our earlier tests. Let's keep that result in green and now try with an iron core. You can see here that the asymmetry is mostly gone, and I believe that's because the iron core is both stealing and amplifying the magnetic field, which enables all of the wire around the core to induce a current from its proximity to the core, which actually gives a much higher voltage than without the core there. So with the addition of our iron core, we gain an increase in power density. We can generate more power compared to an air core generator of the same size. But it comes with a few downsides. We experience something called cogging, which is caused by the magnet's attraction to the core material. This makes our rotor snap into positions that it then needs extra force to move out of. We require significantly stronger and more precise parts to prevent the magnets from touching the core or the other magnets. Coil design is limited by what core iron shapes are manufacturable or easily attainable. For a hobbyist, custom sector-shaped iron cores aren't easy to come by. Eddy current losses. Magnetic cores turn some of the imparted energy into heat. Hysteresis. Core material takes longer than air to become magnetized or alternate magnetic polarity, and that becomes ineffective at high frequencies. This means that in applications where maximum performance is needed for a given space, and manufacturing with strong materials and tight tolerances is possible, iron core is the way. But for a home hobbyist with just a 3D printer and a dream, a coreless design will be much more suitable. Now it's time to build something. I've got enamelled copper wire in various different sizes, M12 bolts in different lengths, bearings which fit the bolts here. I'm going to be using these as axles for strength. Some PETG from bamboo, which is a bit stronger than PLA for printing mechanical parts. I've got some bar magnets which are 30 by 10 by 5 millimeters. And lastly, I've got some loads. These here are about the only incandescent light globes that I could find anywhere. Hard to come by. In a few different voltages and wattages, and stretch goals, some Christmas lights that we might be able to power if things go particularly well. Alrighty, I've printed a bunch of our parts and I'm really happy with how they're looking. The print quality of this PETG is excellent. Now we're just about ready to start assembly, but in order to do that I need to sink these inserts into some of these holes. Now I actually designed this base plate to be reversible, so I'm going to mount it backwards while we install the bearings and gears. This first drive gear has 73 teeth and will turn a smaller gear with 18 teeth for a roughly 4-to-1 increase in speed. And now this thing should spin beautifully. And it doesn't. It binds up more than it should. Maybe the bearing seals and grease are adding a lot of friction, so I'm going to try degreasing them and see if they spin a bit more freely. Much better. Let's put it back together. And it's worse now? Alrighty, I think I've figured out what's going on here. I've got this 2mm thick white flange inside here to separate the two bearings, and that's to prevent them from being able to slide all the way through and travel out of this part. So the outer face of the bearing sits against that white flange, and then the same on this side. But as we squeeze them together, as we tighten the bolt's only compressing the inner race of each bearing towards each other, which means the outer race is pushing that way, inner race is pushing that way, and that's actually pinching the balls inside to the point where they can't move anymore. So we're basically seizing these up. So what I've done is I've 3D printed these little spaces, which will be able to pop in the middle there, and these spaces are 2.4mm, so they're slightly thicker than that white flange. So I think that means if we then install our second bearing and bolt this all together, we should be compressing only the inner races of the bearings, and it should remain free to spin. So let's find out. There we go. Beautiful. All of that friction is gone. So I don't know if we actually needed to remove the rubber seals and all of the grease from the bearings, but at least now we know we've got this thing spinning as smooth as it possibly can. Here we've got the lower gear, which has got a recess for the bolt head. Not too bad. Let's get the handle on. Alrighty, that's the crank and drive gear sorted. I've left 4 holes here to bolt on our stator. That's the stationary part of the generator that holds the copper windings. The rotor, the rotating part of the generator which holds the permanent magnets, will be mounted to the bolt in the middle. Here I'm installing a pair of magnets with their north pole facing out, and the next pair with their north pole facing in, and then one more magnet in between them to create something called a Hallmark array, which helps focus the magnetic field outwards from the rotor. Time to add some copper windings. I'm going to start with a single loop of wire at the same spacing as our magnets. This should generate a similar waveform to our pair of magnets sliding over a coil. And we are seeing the same waveform, only multiple times, because it's now repeating as our rotor is rotating. You can see a quiet period between the waves while the magnets are travelling around the empty space. I'm going to add some more wire loops to increase the voltage. Adding about 10 loops has increased the voltage, but we're only getting that power very briefly as the magnets pass the coil. Fun fact, this is how the spark plug on your lawnmower engine is powered. Once per revolution, a single magnet on the flywheel passes a coil in exactly the right place. But that's not what we're after today. Let's fill up our rotor with magnets all the way round. Here you can see we're generating about 200 millivolts of alternating current, and the frequency goes up and down with the speed of the rotor. But we still need more voltage to do anything useful with this generator. But rather than adding more coils around the stator, I'm going to do a single serpentine winding. This means that each loop will have 8 points at which it's generating power. Multiply that times as many loops as I can fit, and let's see what we get. I've got the oscilloscope set to 1 volt per division, which means we've got 0 volts in the middle, and it will be 4 volts on the top, minus 4 volts on the bottom. So let's see how many volts this thing can make. Well, with very minimal effort, we're getting plus or minus 1.5 volts, so that's 3 volts AC waveform. We speed up a little bit. Getting to 6 volts, 8 volts, There we go, we can get up to 8 volts AC out of it. Okay, I've connected up a little green LED here which wants 3 volts. We're about to give it 8 volts AC, so I don't know how long it'll last, but we'll see what happens. Well, that works. Let's see what else we can power. I don't know who invented this kind of packaging, but there's a special place in hell for them. All right, managed to liberate one of our halogen lights. I don't know if you can see that, it's just beginning to glow, but I can't quite turn this thing fast enough. Alrighty, we were able to light up an LED, we were able to get a little glow out of our halogen light, and now I've connected it to a string of Christmas lights, which I think is a bit optimistic, but let's see what happens. It's working! It works! It's a Christmas miracle! But I'm not going to keep doing that all night, so I think I'll get the power supply out to keep them lit up. There's certainly a few things I want to change. A 4:1 reduction ratio on the gearbox is not enough, so I think I need a 2-stage reduction gearbox so that we can get 20:1 or something like that, so I don't need to turn this thing quite so fast. And we need something stronger here so that it doesn't get crushed by the windings as we keep wrapping all of the copper onto it. But I'm going to do some iterative improvements on this, and you may see it again in the future. But thank you very much for watching. I hope you learned something. Merry Christmas, and I'll see you in the next one.